Welcome to the Layman's Seminary. Today, this video is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to continue doing the methods on how to study and share the Bible. But what we've done in previous videos is we've gone through the sentence, we've gone through the paragraph, we've gone through the book, uh, and now we're going back into uh, to demonstrate this method today about paraphrasing. We're going to deal with the sentence once again from 1 John. And so, what we're going to do at this point is I'm going to talk to you about a book that I've read and I recommend. I personally know the author. I've been blessed to interview him recently, and you can find that interview uh, on my YouTube channel with Clay Kaler. And he wrote a book, a fictional book called The Fallen, which is fixing to be turned into a movie that he's involved with producing and even, I believe, starring in, or at least acting in. And so, um, but this book right here is another one that I mentioned in the video, and it's about Bible study methods. And so I'm going to be discussing one of the methods from his book because I felt like that it's a good way to clarify some of the things that I've already explained uh, in previous videos to help a person do their descriptive summaries. And so the book title is really interesting. It's called The Unashamed, and it just relates to the idea that the Christians should not be ashamed of the Word of God, but should know how to handle it. It's from the Timothy passage. Okay, so scrolling down here, there's my outline, my talking points and stuff. Basically, um, whenever you're doing what I'm calling synthetic Bible study here, there's three steps that I've demonstrated in the other videos. Like I said, at the various levels: a sentence, paragraph, chapter, and whole book. And those include descriptive summaries, which are you're basically describing the Bible world. Interpretive summaries is you're kind of focusing on trying to interpret it in such a way that it gets to the heart of the passage and prepares you for looking for what's called the timeless truth principle. And your application summary is what you will focus on as to application for the modern world. Um, so, and then as I explained, just going with the mission statement of the Layman Seminary, you have this idea of how to study and share the Bible with others. And so you have the study aspect, and the sharing part of it is this 5 point outline: introduction, explanation, application, illustration, conclusion, and challenge. This is not going to change too much in this particular video because we're just going to be focusing on how to do the descriptive summary aspect of things. But those those steps are involved whether you put them on paper or whether you're describing to somebody else. So what I'll probably do is I'll probably show how those steps relate to how when you're talking to somebody about a particular passage of scripture. Okay, and so we're going to be focusing on the paraphrase method, as I mentioned before, and this is kind of like related to the making of the descriptive summaries. As I said, the descriptive summaries focus on the Bible world, the past, and they're trying to describe what's going on. Well, Clay in his book, he gives one, two, three, four examples underneath his paraphrasing method, and the first one is substitution. This is where uh, you substitute one word for another word. Then there's expansion. That's where you add more words to explain. Reduction is where, of course, you're trying to reduce the words when you're summarizing. And inversion is where you're changing the word order. And he says that substitution is the more uh, accurate one because you're trying. The goal of these summaries or this paraphrasing method is for you to think intentionally about what the text is saying. And I'm going to be doing an interview of him discussing the individual parts of this book, the background, his intent for all that. So y'all stay tuned for that. So at this point, I want to just begin talking about substitution a little bit and perhaps demonstrating it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, as I've explained in previous videos, I'm going to do it now. I'm just going to go to Bible.org. I know most people don't have Bible software, so I'm just going to go to Bible.org and get our passage. I'm wheezing right now, so I wish I had my inhaler. I could take it. Let me cough for a second. Apologize for that. Temperature change and all that. Okay. All right. So, 1 John. We're just going to do chapter 1. Going to go with the NASB. You pick whatever translation you want to use. Even though I got 4 verses here, I'm actually going to try to do my best to just do it at the sentence level. So 1 verse. Okay. So 1 sentence. So, all right. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to substitute each one of these words here. And this may be a little bit difficult with this passage, but it's what I've chosen to work with. So let's see what happens. Okay. What was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we looked at and touched with our hands concerning the word of life. Now, perhaps maybe in this particular situation, just to simplify what we're dealing with, and we're seeing a kind of pattern going on here, maybe me dividing it up by commas might help. This is not required. Just a method is coming to my mind, and I can change my font and perhaps put my own substitution next. I'll put it in red. Usually use the color blue for things, but anyway, what was from the beginning? And so let's try to do our best to try to substitute every single word and see what happens. Not sure that's going to work, but it makes you think about the word selection and choice. Okay, so what? Well, what was from the beginning? We could say, and you'll see this in different translations. You could say that. You could say which. You could say even who in some translations. What was from the beginning? Now, the word was is going to be very difficult to be able to do this because was is focusing on the past, incomplete action, basically. So, what I'm just going to leave the was the same. What was from the beginning? The word from a lot of times associates with source. So you may just want to add a word in. Well, we don't want to add words. That's another level. So we got to think here. That was from the beginning. That was, maybe see. I'll just use this word at. Not saying that that's more accurate, but just going with it. That was from the beginning. And so right here, what I probably want to do here is the beginning. And so it's an event. So that was from the beginning. That was at the beginning. So something maybe like the beginning is referring to creation if we take Genesis. So that was at, we could keep the, or we could just keep a creation. Well, we'll just keep the creation. That was at the creation. Okay. What we have heard. So we'll go with our that again. And we pretty much can't do too much with that. I mean, we could change the word we to the apostles. That the, let's do that. That the apostles. Now, when I said that from the beginning, I assumed automatically that we were talking about the beginning of creation. But this could actually be the beginning of Jesus' ministry. So, and I believe, what was from the beginning, that was at the creation. That was at, see, substitution is pretty difficult because you want words to be accurate. So that was at, what was from the beginning, that was at the it's referring to Christ's ministry. So we'll just try this, at the new ministry. So what you see is I had to add a word in there. So substitution, there may be times where you have to expand. That was at the new ministry. What we have heard, that the apostles heard. Okay, and so what we have seen with our own eyes, that another word for we have seen, we could say that the apostles witnessed, um, we could say visibly with our eyes. I kind of did some reduction there because I simplify certain words. Okay, what we have looked at and touched with our own hands. Okay, so that the apostles have gazed at, or you could say examined. Let's go with examined. EXAMIND, and touch with our own hands. So that would be something like in touch with our hands. So examined and hmm, felt uh, in the flesh. Let's just try something like that. And that kind of, the with is the in, our hands in the flesh. It's there's a little bit of expansion there, but oh well. Okay, now concerning, we're going to say regarding, or you could say with respect to, but I call it regarding because it's one word. The word of life. The let's call the word something else. Let's call it the revelation of life. Of life is the idea of life that we're talking about here is the idea of I would say possibly purpose right here. Okay. Now at this point, I am not suggesting that you bring all this together and that this is going to make this more clear. Now this is just used for demonstrative purposes, but let's just see what happens. Let's see if it changes any of the meaning. If we just says that was at that new ministry that the apostles heard, that the apostles witnessed visibly, and that the apostles have examined in the flesh regarding the revelation purpose. Doesn't sound doesn't sound very good, right? I mean, substitution should clarify things, but you can see that whenever you're changing one word for another word, it's not always going to work, and that makes you think about word selection. Why did the Holy Spirit lead the author with his own personalities, backgrounds, and skills to choose one word over another? Because the words that a person uses are very important, especially in context. Well, what we see here is that when you're doing paraphrasing, you're trying to move uh, one step further than your English translation. You're trying to um, think about it in other words that may help unlock things, but there's also a danger in that. I mean, it can confuse things as well. Um, so we can see how this works a little bit, but let's say that I use expansion. Let's say that I come back through here, even though I said I'm gonna focus on substitution. Let's say that whenever I can't substitute a word or it doesn't seem to substitute, instead I feel like I need to expand. In other words, explain things because I feel like the idea needs to be unpacked. I can come back through and I can say, all right, I've tried to do my best to be word for word in substitution. And this actually helps you understand translation differences, why there's differences in translation. That was at the new ministry that the apostles heard. witness, visibly, examine. Now the thing is that the verb is not in this passage, or the main verb. So the what, that, it's talking about a concept. Perhaps um let's try something like this. The topic. We're assuming that the what, it's some kind of topic. The topic existed, and there's a problem with saying existed as opposed to was, because was implies the action hasn't stopped, where existed sounds like it has stopped. But we'll just use existed for right now. The topic that we're talking about, that, and we know that they're apostles because we already read it. The topic that the apostles are talking about is the beginning, is, let's see, talking about what existed from the beginning of, um, oh, well, let's use another word besides beginning. Let's use onset. Onset of Jesus's, we know it's talking about Jesus. Onset of Jesus' um, ministry. Beginning of Jesus' ministry. In other words, when he called the apostles. A topic that the apostles are talking about is what existed from the onset of Jesus' ministry. So you could say this includes the teachings of Jesus that they heard, because that's what they're talking about, what we heard and what we have seen with our own eyes. And perhaps this relates to the miracles. And the miracles we have witnessed visibly. But I don't know, and this makes you think about it though when you're talking about this idea of, when he says we have seen with our own eyes. Is it focusing on the miracles that Jesus did, or is it focusing on the fact that Jesus actually was in the flesh? Well, because I know a little bit about the book and also its similarity to the Gospel of John, I'm going to scratch the idea that it's related to the miracles, teachings of Jesus that they heard, or maybe you can even expand in the sense that you could say, and the miracles that he did in in a real body of flesh. I could say fleshly body, but some people might think that's referring to the sin nature, so I just went ahead and called it body of flesh. All right, the miracles that he did in a real, real, it says really, a real body of flesh. The apostles have witnessed visibly. The apostles have witnessed visibly. We could say his nature and his um, abilities, perhaps we could say. And then that the apostles have examined and felt. The apostles have witnessed visibly his nature and his very, and so I can make that as summarize, maybe a little bit more scientific way. Say in an empirical manner or way. So you see, touch, feel it, and so that summarizes that. And concerning the word of life, the apostles have witnessed visibly his nature and his abilities in an empirical manner. And so the idea behind concerning the word of life, this is who we're talking about, this topic. So you could say like this topic is about a person or it could be an idea, but it's clearly a person, I believe. This topic is about a person called something to the effect of the revelation of God that provides clarity of purpose for mankind. Now, as you can see, by using expansion, I took the words into substitution and I expanded on them. I clarified what is going on there. All right. But still, so then we go to the next step, reduction. Now, I've said a lot, but my goal is, and a lot of times whenever I'm doing summary, and I've done in the previous videos, my main goal is to try to bring the information down, make it more manageable. Whenever I help people with writing papers, or whenever I'm writing papers, and I'm looking at discussions about how people interpret the Hebrew in particular areas, I use this method to narrow down what each one's saying individually, and then I narrow it down even more through summary, replacing the words, and then I of course factor in my study from it after which I've already done prior to that, and that helps me get an idea for a summary, so that when I go to write my paper and summarize what a commentator or grammarian is saying, I already have that there. So we've done our substitution, right? And I'll just write these words or copy them here so that we can see the exact step we did. So here's our substitution. Down here. Here's our substitution. Here's our expansion. Okay. Now we're fixing to do the reduction. And the reduction, like I said, is pretty much what I've done in the other videos. And then we'll do the inversion in a minute. So, okay. So reduction, I'm trying to summarize what's going on here. You could say something like the apostles, and even though it's represented by John, you could say the apostolic witness alive at that time represents the teachings of the apostles that were taught by Jesus while he while Jesus from the onset of his I'm just going to say ministry on earth. Ministry on earth. This was a time when the apostles knew for fact, knew empirically, let's just say empirically, knew this time was the apostles knew empirically that Jesus was fully man, even though he was fully God. Here, his role of creator, sustainer, and illuminator are implied in the word of life phrase. It's a link to the Gospel of John. So that's a little bit short words, and if you wanted, you could take this phrase off right here and just keep it like that. And so we pretty much kept the same order here. We clarified that the topic that we're talking about is the teachings of Christ, or what was occurring during the time of Jesus' ministry. We went, and after that, so we did a little bit of what's called inversion. We switched some words, the word order around, but and then there was and knowing empirically, we took that whole statement about witnessing and with their own eyes and all that, and summarized it there. And then we unpacked the idea behind him being the word of life, and the relationship before that to why the passage is emphasizing empirically what's going on. And like I said, a lot of this paraphrase is going to be shaped by what you understand about the book and the context at that time. So let's try inversion this time. Let's try to take these ideas here and try to put them in a different order, to rearrange things so that it flows better. So what we could say is that where this is kind of wordy, the apostolic witnesses alive at the time, talking about John. He's representing the teaching of the apostles. That's all great, but it's pretty wordy. I mean, you can go in and you can explain how John is the last apostle and he's a representative and of that and all that. But maybe at this point, it might just be best to just say it like this: the apostle John, um, the apostle John, gives testimony concerning the empirical um, verification of the humanity and divinity of Christ. So in that, we kind of move things around. But maybe if we wanted to do this a little bit closer to the idea of inversion, we could move some more words around. So like Apostle John gives testimony concerning the empirical verification of humanity and divinity of Christ, because they're not doubting his divinity like people do nowadays, but rather they were doubting his humanity because the false teaching that existed at that time. Perhaps we could switch it around and talk about that the Apostle John gives testimony to show that while Christ was divine, he was also human, or something like that. You can invert it. And so you kind of get an idea about what you're doing with each step. You're in substitution, you're going word for word. You're switching one word for another, which may not always be possible. In expansion, you are explaining things. In reduction, you're trying to say what it's being said in less words. And then in inversion, you're moving the words around. And so what I'm trying to say is I'm not necessarily saying you should go through all these steps, but I think you should be aware of these steps. In other words, when you come to a passage and you're doing a descriptive summary, you could say, all right, what are the words being used and what synonyms are them? And so you could think about that and now help you like, okay, how do we explain what is being said here? And how do I reduce this explanation down to where it's manageable? And do I need to switch the order around to clarify what I'm saying? So when you do something like that, then you'll end up with another summary. So I'll go ahead and let me see. I think I can open it this way. I'll go ahead and open one of the ones from last week so that we can see a previous summary I did. That's book. I think I got one down here for. Well, this is a summary for the whole book right here. Nope, that's not the one I wanted. Sorry about that. Okay, let's try something else. As you can see, I got all of my Ruth work here. How to study and share from a Bible chapter. That might work. Let's go with that. Okay. So here's a descriptive summary, and this is at the, I think it was at the paragraph level whenever I did it. So here, right here, you have the apostolic circle is writing for the purpose of wanting the audience to have fellowship with them as God, as well as the joy that results. He describes a unique experience with Jesus while he was on earth. This implies that fellowship and joy can be broken or hindered if one does not have the right view of Christ's nature. The apostolic circle gives the contents of this message concerning the attributes of God and how they contrast with the attributes of a person who is claiming to be in fellowship with God. So that's a whole chapter summary, and that's the thing. You can do these different levels of different things, but so what you see is that I've kind of moved things around, and that's what you can kind of do. I wish I could show you this a summary of a sentence one, but it's probably not in my immediate search results since it was a few weeks ago whenever I did it. Okay, so the takeaway from this particular lesson is you might want to think in your mind about substitution first, and don't say, okay, how do I substitute every word? I I mean, you can do that method, don't get me wrong, but I think that for the purpose of what I'm teaching, what you may want to do is you may just want to think about in your mind, okay, I want to try to be as accurate as I can to the text, but I want my summary, my descriptive summary, to explain the text. In other words, to give an expansion where it's needed, but at the same time, while I'm expanding the text, I want to reduce what I'm saying. I don't want to end up with saying a whole lot whenever I had a very small verse. I may be unpacking the verse, but that doesn't help whenever I'm trying to get to the main idea or the main focus. Um, and then inversion is okay, I've got this out, I've written this out, but you know what? It's not flowing good. I want it to flow so I can explain it to someone else. And so I'm going to move the words around. So you can see how that kind of works. And for those that do the Lifeway materials, the Explore to God series, for Sunday school, we're going to be in Leviticus 9 and 10. So the conclusion or the challenge is maybe you find go into the book of Leviticus and pick a passage, a paragraph, a sentence, whatever you want to do, and find something and work these steps. Substitute, do an exposition, expanding, reducing, and inversion. And let me show you how this works in ministry now. The how to share it with someone else, that aspect of things. So let's say that I'm in Sunday school class, right? And I'm reading the passage, and the teacher asks me, "What's this passage talking about?" And so you're reading the passage and you're thinking in your mind, okay, there's a word there. It's similar to this word, this concept, this idea. So you're doing substitution in your mind. You're thinking about how to use words that your teacher or most likely the people in the class will understand so that you're conveying your point. So you start substituting the words that are in the text without even thinking about it. You're saying, okay, like for example, we were in Leviticus last week, and so it's talking about the offerings and the sacrifices and things like that. And so the way you describe it is you could be talking about where it's talking about um, there were certain parts that needed to be burned up, and so the idea being is God us giving a God all or giving God our best or things like that, and so those ideas explain what is going on in the text. But whenever I share it with someone else, I want to reduce it down. So let me just work with First John real quick and see how I do this. So if I were to let me put this in other words. That's what paraphrasing is. Let me put this in other words. What First John would read. Um, I, the Apostle John, am talking to you about the fact that Jesus Christ was in human flesh, and we heard and we witnessed empirically what he was teaching while he was on earth. Now, see that one, I went into much explanation there. but that seems to be my tendency. And so, you reduce it or things like that. But basically, whenever you're doing communication, you're saying, do I use the exact same word somebody says, or do I use different words? Because I can't remember the exact way that it was said, and I also want to add something to it. And whenever I add something to it, when I change the word, uh, I need to explain something. I need to expand something. But at the same time, when I'm expanding something, I don't want to say too much. I don't want to elaborate and go on about something. I want to reduce it down to a basic idea. And I may have to, in the midst of talking, recognize, okay, this is the ideas that came to my mind, but I need to change the order for emphasis. And so I've kind of demonstrated that in this video. And so hopefully y'all got an idea about how these steps can help you in making your descriptive summaries. The reason I think these steps are so helpful is because when I was teaching this method about how to make descriptive summaries, I didn't used to call it descriptive summaries. I would call it paraphrasing a passage. I would call it exegetical summary, observational summary. But when I use the word paraphrase, what I noticed is that the people that I was teaching would end up using it almost word for word, kind of like substitution. So they would end up with the same amount of words that the scripture had, or even more. And so I was like, okay. And so when I was explaining what I was looking for, this person said, "Oh, you mean like a description?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's the perfect word." Because we just don't want to say or repeat word for word what's going on, or just change one word here or there. We want to describe what we think's going on in the text at an observational level. This is not interpretation. This is observation. We're considering the possibilities. And so as soon as I did that, it made the person, when you're trying to describe something to somebody else, you already are expanding, but at the same time you're reducing your words because you're trying to get your point across, and you're rearranging things in that way. And so that's why I just call it a descriptive summary. But these steps will help you develop your descriptive summaries, whether you write them on paper or whether you just have them in mind when you do it. So thank y'all for listening, for attending the Layman Seminary on this particular issue. If you can afford it, be sure to check out the book, the Unashamed by Clay Kaler, as I mentioned before, and I'll show you the page again. It's at Amazon. Um, Also, please give me any feedback that you can. Be sure to subscribe and share. And thank y'all so much for this time. God bless.